Hey everyone, welcome to Binkhorsts and Blockbusters. This is a brother sister podcast about movies. I'm Kate,
And I'm Garrett.
and this month we are waging a war on Christmas by reviewing war movies. And tonight I am very excited to present our World War One double feature.
Yes, this will be a good one. We're going to talk about a couple movies that take place in World War One, All Quiet on the Western Front, and 1917.
Yeah, these movies really hit home how much this war fucking sucked.
It's awful. Uh,
Yeah, this is terrible.
we talked a couple of weeks ago about World War II and Saving Private Ryan and how absolutely terrifying that movie was and is. Uh, these movies in their iterations are just as horrifying.
Yeah, I honestly think worse. I think this is worse than anything that happens in Saving Private Ryan and World War II. I think World War One is downright terrible, disgusting, really dumb. At
There
least
are
the land war.
Yes, there are reasons why after World War One we were like, we need to set up rules for this shit because mustard gas, chlorine gas, the just generally trenches. This is all awful. We can't do this one again.
Yeah, it was real left up, and these movies really put it into perspective. They are not hero glory movies that glorify war at all. They're down and dirty and disgusting, and um really show you the horrors from both sides
Yes,
of the war. And it's important to note in this war very much that for the average you know, soldier, the both sides, it was terrible.
yes.
Um, yeah, they had the same problems on both sides, and it was not pleasant.
But before we talk too much more about these movies, uh, you may have noticed there was a break in our uploads, and that's because there are no cannons in Italy.
Yeah, a few weeks ago on one of the episodes, I talked about, jokingly about like going to Italy and shooting a cannon. And I went to Italy to try and see some cannons. And I went to Italy for other things, but one of my goals was to see some cannons. And I think that growing up in the Midwest, really, gave me the expectation that there would be cannons everywhere.
Well,
And
yeah,
it
I mean,
turns out in Italy there are no cannons.
like when we went to Gettysburg on our school trips, like there were cannons every 10 feet. I just assumed we
Yeah.
just put cannons everywhere there was a battle. And that and a little like placard that says what happened.
Yeah, I mean, we went to Blue Jackets games in Columbus, and they shot off a cannon when they scored a goal. Like, so cannons are ubiquitous to the Midwestern experience. Turns out, they took dearmament in post World War II Italy very seriously, and they
Hmm.
got rid of all the cannons. Um, so there are no fun cannons in Italy. There are cannonballs, and there are really old guns that kind of work a little bit kind of like a cannon, but very not the same.
Shame.
Shame. Truly a shame.
But you had fun.
I had a great time. It was amazing. Time of my life. Got to see everything awesome, and it was amazing, and blah blah blah. Lots of old rocks. Definitely saw lots of old rocks. So, you know,
Cool.
yeah.
Well, now that you've touched grass, you can go back inside and watch some television.
Yeah, I'm excited I got to catch up on the Gilded Age when I got back. I missed two episodes while I was gone, and stuff's finally happening.
Yeah, a lot of the drama is coming to a head. We're getting close to the like big battle of the opera houses. In this latest episode, there was the war on labor, almost literally.
Yeah, yeah. I like the labor plot lines. I like some of the racial tension plot lines. I like some of the, upstairs downstairs drama. So it's been a fun show this season. I really like where it's going.
Yeah, I have fun with this one. Like I said before, I really like just escaping to this era in history for an hour every week. It's just really spectacular. They do a really great job of capturing such like a different vibe of really anything else I've seen. Like
Yeah.
there's not a lot of media of this era, at least that I'm aware of. Certainly not of like this type. Um, at least now, you know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Downton Abbey is a later than this.
The showrunner for that and this show, I think, are the same person. I'm pretty sure.
The showrunner?
The person making it, the director
Oh,
person,
yeah,
the
maybe.
writer,
I don't
whatever.
know. Yeah. I have no idea. But the hats in this show better than Downton, I would say.
There was a hat that Mrs. Van Ryn was wearing, like she was just like, I'm going out, and she goes to see her new brother, her sister's husband, and like she's just wearing this big green hat, and I was like, this looks ridiculous.
Yeah, we need to bring those back. I've been trying to wear more hats. I bought a hat in Italy. I wore it the whole time I was there. I came back, I wear the hat. Bring back hats.
I'm okay with this. I
Mhm.
like all the dudes wearing top hats and fancy mustaches. I think that's a good vibe.
Yes. Oh my gosh, you would look so great in a top hat. You would also be 7 foot tall.
It would be awesome.
It
I
would.
would command legions.
We could be railroad barons. I could be an heiress to a railroad company.
Well, and this fits into something that's recently happened. The United States government has decided to give Amtrak a shitload of money to develop all sorts of new railroads. So maybe if I can become a baron of one of those, it'd be pretty cool. Um,
Garrett, my eyes rolled so far back into my head when you said that I don't think I'm going to get them back. I Amtrak's the biggest disappointment in American society, and I, as much as I want it to improve, I don't think it will. So,
well, yeah, that's true. That's true. I was reading something terrible about how like they want to you know greenify things, but instead of doing the smart thing of putting in overhead wires, they're like trying to change what trains are, and I think that's just ridiculous. But this isn't a train podcast. This is a show. This is a podcast about television and movies, and I went too far there. um, so recently, a new season of Fargo has come out. Are you familiar with the show Fargo?
so I have tried to watch the show Fargo several times, and it makes me too agitated, and I can't do it.
Okay. Um, so each season is kind of like a self-contained story. There are some references to and about it. The first season I think is really good. Um, the second season also pretty good, and the third season very good. The fourth season it kind of fell off. It just had a much different vibe. But season five is pretty good. About half of it is out to watch on Hulu right now, or if you have a television, you can watch it on FX. Um, it stars this season has a John Hamm at the wheel, and he's great in everything he does. He's such a charismatic person.
So here's a question. If I was to just start watching season 5, would that be okay?
Yeah, no problem at all.
Okay.
Sometimes there are, a character comes back, but like they're established. Like it doesn't like it won't attract you. They won't be the main character, for example. Um, in season three, um, the Mrs. Russell, she plays a detective or a police officer that's like going after these guys, and I think that's a good season. Ewan McGregor plays two people. It's very funny.
Okay.
I'm, I
Interesting.
feel like I'm not selling this very well, but I'm not trying to. It's just a fun show. If you watch a trailer for a season and feel like you might be interested in it, go for it. It has a very similar vibe to the movie.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I love the movie. It's just that, like, watching the first, because I think I've seen the first two episodes of the first season, and, like, I just couldn't get past it because it just made me so uncomfortable. And I know that's the point. Um, but yeah, that's where I'm at. It is similar to, like, The Bear made me very agitated, but I kept going. I've just never kept going for Fargo.
I see. Yeah, I can see where those sort of anxieties would come in. It, being that it's Fargo, it's centered a lot on like quote unquote true crime of like, presenting something as being something that happened or like a realistic or like a pretty gruesome depiction of crimes. Usually completed by bumbling idiots, which is, what makes it funny and even more buffoonery from the police and judicial system.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Yeah.
enjoy it, and I'm glad it's coming back. Uh, that's probably the last I'll talk on this show. It surprised me. I didn't even realize we were getting another season.
Surprise new seasons are always a good thing.
Yes. Now I can advance the slide. So we're first going to talk about 1917, which is a war film. But first, we need to understand what this war was about. So on June 28th, 1914, this guy, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was shot by Gabriel Princip when he was eating a sandwich in somewhere in Austria. This would be the last good thing anybody ate in Europe for the next like 5 to 10 years, and then afterwards it got really bad again in the 30s. And
Yeah.
that's World War One.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. No more mayo on your sandwich, only pumpernickel bread. Maybe some steamed turnips.
Yeah. We were talking before, and it's like if we were presented with these situations, it is the Titanic service pistol route out. Uh, these is probably the most gruesome conflict we'll probably talk about, at least this year for the War on Christmas.
Yeah, yeah, I would say definitely the most gruesome. I think that the bright side of this one though is that for civilians, not as bad, uh, generally in the grand scheme of things as many other wars. They did keep to those lines of battle pretty strictly. So, you
Well,
know,
well, they hadn't done enough with planes to realize you can bomb the ever-loving shit out of everything. Um,
indeed, yeah.
the Germans hadn't figured out the Blitzkrieg yet. Uh, and yeah, you're right. Civilian life was slightly better,
Hmm.
especially compared to, I think we're comparing it to World War II, where everything was just hell and most of Europe had to be rebuilt to some extent.
Yeah.
Um, However, you can still go to the Somme today and see, the trenches and craters. It's a pockmarked landscape that, really can't be helped.
Yeah, yeah, we did some environmental destruction there, some geoengineering with our um, war machine.
Yeah. So this film is directed by Sam Mendes. You might recognize this name as being the director behind a couple of the James Bond movies, Skyfall and Spectre, as well as American Beauty many years before that. However, the cinematographer you'll probably definitely recognize is Roger Deakins. We've talked about him before in our Burn After Reading when he was working with the Coen brothers. He's worked on most of their movies. No Country for Old Men is another notable one. I think he won some awards for that. He also worked with Sam Mendes on Skyfall, and then in the latest Blade Runner, he worked with Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah, all good movies.
This film, while we're talking about the cinematographer, I think we have to talk about the film being marketed and praised for being in a one take style. We'll talk about this a lot more later, but if even if you don't notice it going in, when you're watching the film, it is nearly impossible to look away because you're constantly focusing on, the two main actors, the action. It's all directly in your face. There are no, big sweeping shots of the landscape or anything to give you a sense of place. It is claustrophobic.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right about the way that the film is done. It makes you focus on what's directly in front of you. And I watched this on the airplane coming back from Italy, and like I was like moving in my seat because it is one of those movies that like you're in the driver's seat, metaphorically, and it is almost like a horror movie in that way where like you're in there, and
Yeah,
it's very immersive. It's a way to create a very immersive um feeling that I'd never thought of this, because this film style is used in a lot of things, but I never thought of it being used in this context before, and it really takes a war movie to a different place of putting you, the viewer, alongside these guys in the trenches in this terribleness, in a way that I'd never seen before.
yeah. This is certainly the first film other than All Quiet on the Western Front, that I've really seen this depiction of the war from, and it is terrifying.
Yeah, I off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of any other World War One movies. Because Dunkirk was World War Two, right? Yeah, because
Yes,
all the boats. And the planes too.
yes.
Um I think that there's a dogfighting movie that's World War One. So like the early planes. I don't remember what that's called off the top of my head. But yeah,
I
there
don't know.
there just aren't that many World War One movies, and I think that there's a reason why.
Yes. Well, I think the Red Baron. There was probably a movie surrounding him because he was a World War One plane
Hmm.
guy. Um, yeah, World War Two, being that it was, I mean, I hesitate to say a bigger conflict, but I think it left a much bigger impression. And like we talked about in Saving Private Ryan, there was a way to make some movies about that more heroic, more like, Steve McQueen escaping the camp on a motorcycle. Like there was more ways to do that than in this. Um,
Right, and I think that the villain in this in World War Two is a lot better too. And you also have so much more action in World War Two, where you have, tank battles in a town, and like storming the beach and taking over different positions.
yeah,
Whereas in World War One, you just have a bunch of kids running through some trenches and dying.
and
Um,
fighting over every inch of it and dying over every inch of it, every inch of
yeah.
land gained.
Yeah, I would be interested in a movie that could be about, but I don't know how interesting it would actually be, is some of the naval battles of World War One. I think that would be interesting. But at the same time, like a naval battle movie, maybe not actually fun to watch. So, there's pros and cons. Like not every movie can be Hunt for a Red October. We already have that one. Could
Right.
they really make something that interesting? um you know and I think that these two movies capture World War One in such a like fundamentally full way that I don't really want more. I'm good.
Yeah, I feel like in tandem, being that they each present a different side, and I won't say they're the same movie, obviously, but like the experiences between these people are the same.
Yeah, I mean there is a reason why we chose to do the double feature. I just happened to watch both of these movies in the past week, and they really have so many similarities. They were both made in the last, 5 years, and they were both, on the same subject. They cover the same issue. They're in the same setting, but they're different sides. They're showing vastly different perspectives on going through the same situation, and like it's grim.
Yeah. So before we talk more about the film, a couple nice facts. So this film was made on a budget of $100 million and got a box office return of 384 million. So a pretty big success. They spent a ton of money on um, posters, publicity, doing all sorts of things for the film. This was one of the last films to hit theaters before the COVID pandemic, which is crazy. It was that long ago. Um, it ended up winning a bunch of awards at the Academy, including Best Cinematography, Best Sound Mixing, and Best Visual Effects. Um, it was a pretty big movie that year. And we talked a little bit in Braveheart about historical accuracy, and I feel like in especially World War One and World War Two movies, it's going to be a bit easier to do well on historical accuracy because there are so many written accounts, because it's so recent, because there are still people from these conflicts that are, uh, well, maybe not from the First World War alive, but their memory and their influence and their recounting of the events live on. In 1917, none of the main characters or supporting characters were real. They weren't based on real people or generals. The film faced a little bit of criticism from its depiction of Black and Indian soldiers. Uh, while these people did exist and were fighting in World War One, they were in different theaters of combat. However, they're in the film. That's a good depiction. That's a good way to use and get the idea and understanding that this is a world war and that there were all of these different peoples and cultures fighting for the common good. Um, and the framing device for this film was criticized, having people go behind enemy lines to deliver a message to somebody that is both ahead of and in front of the front. Uh, However, I think it just wasn't explained that well and didn't really need to be. The idea that these guys have to go on a adventure to go across no man's land, to go through a ruined city, to get to the woods, to get to where the next battle is, fine. I don't really care about the geography of it. Um, this idea for the story was based on a story Sam Mendes's grandfather Alfred told him. He was a messenger on the Western Front, so it's not wholly unlikely, but there are parts of it that may not be accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, I guess, now thinking back, like the path that they went on doesn't quite make sense, but I think that, it's very similar to I think we've talked about this a couple times now on the podcast, the Heart of Darkness
Yeah.
phenomenon of, you're going deeper and deeper in the jungle, in the different circles, and you're getting closer and closer to madness. And I think that's just a reality of, war movies. And I think that it takes a movie and it takes like a premise of being in a war and adds a human element to it. And I think that the disorientation that he goes through as part of, trying to deliver the message, makes sense. And so like even if geographically it doesn't quite make sense, you know, eh, yeah.
So our film follows two guys that go on this mission. Very similar to like Saving Private Ryan in the why are we sending these just two guys to do something really important? Um, this is more like your best shot is to not send a bunch of people, so these guys can kind of sneak and stealth through no man's land. Um, so there is William Schofield. He is the character we follow through the entirety of the movie, and Thomas Blake, the one we don't. Um, so one of my favorite parts of this film is we they get their mission and then they go through the trenches and they're interacting with a bunch of soldiers along the way. And they finally get to the Yorks to talk to them and be like, how the hell do we get across this? And there are a bunch of like landmarks they use for getting across no man's land, for getting through the wires and trying to get to the other side. And it's a path that's marked by corpses. They refer to one as like the bowing man because it's somebody that was blown apart, but their corpse is like bowing over barbed wire. They remark about the dead horses that mark the way. Um, it reminds me a lot of like the climbing Mount Everest and that path being marked by corpses of just
Hmm.
an incredibly like bleak path that these people have to go on to secure the front and they're intimate with, and it's awful.
Yeah, it's really gross. And this movie, like from the very beginning of them going out there, it gets really gross. Like the one guy cuts his hand on the barbed wire and then immediately, like in the next 5 minutes, sticks that hand through a dead corpse. Like gross. Ew. That's how you get gangrene and all kinds of other terrible things. And like that visceral like ew.
Yeah, and they eventually get through the no man's land to an old German bunker, and they remark that the rats over on the German side they're bigger, and they are just disgusting looking creatures. Um,
Yeah.
the you know we've in trench warfare in history books, I've always seen the diagram of what trenches look like, and in both of these films we go through trenches and like there's just such a difference in how all of them are made, whether they're like hasty or the Germans that we see here, they're like almost like concreted up, or like there's wooden supports. There's mesh holding back the dirt. They're all full of water. They're all full of rats. They're all gonna give you gangrene, trench foot, some kind of horrible, sickening plague. Uh, if the gas falls on you, you're going to get got by that because you're in a low lying ditch. If the bombs fall, you're going to get trapped in it. It's
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah, it's really terrible and it's claustrophobic. It's narrow, it's full of dead people, it's full of sick people. There's no food, there's no warmth, there's no dryness. It really is hell on earth and they do a good job of capturing this. They also, capture kind of briefly when when they talk to the Yorks about like the mentality of being on that front line also of just being like mentally not okay. Because the guys they're talking to, they have that look, that hollow look in their eyes of, this just being a terrible, terrible place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
uh, so
it's
over
awful.
so over the course of the movie, our two characters they have like some bonding moments, and this is something that's prevalent, I think, in most war movies where we're going to look at is there is a brotherhood in arms. Um, whether they're out marching and singing their songs in step, or they're hiking through the trenches and telling each other stories just to like calm each other down. um, that there's some level of heroics of pulling them out of craters or collapsing bunkers, saving each other's lives with gunfire and knives. There's a lot of trust you have to put in one another for this mission, or for these missions in this war. And I think this is
Mhm.
very beautifully captured between these two, who
Yeah.
genuinely are friends and care for each other. And when Thomas Blake falls, doing quite a noble thing, saving someone from a burning plane and getting stabbed for being on the wrong side. Uh, you feel for everyone involved, and it's a terrible thing. And then you're very scared when the good guys show up and they talk for the first time. That startled me.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's such a silence over the scene, and yeah, you have this extreme sympathy and mourning for what happens, and it really is like you feel their brotherhood between them. And also, you understand, so Blake, all of his motivation is about getting this information to the line where his own real brother
Yeah,
is stationed so that he can save his life. And William, absorbs that as well as, a friend. And but at the same time, William has this, a distance to him in his relationship with Thomas, because, he knows how this could go. But at the same time, it affects him greatly too. So it's, yeah, it
yeah,
it was a beautifully done scene, a beautifully done friendship of capturing that.
yeah. William was a veteran of the song and got a medal for it that he traded to a Frenchman for some wine. He doesn't
Hmm.
seem to believe in like the heroics and the worth of like a medal or a ribbon, uh, merely his actions. But he ends up being, more so the hero of the film and of this conflict. We talk about there's not necessarily heroic stories here, but he definitely is. It's bleak and awful and terrible how he gets there, but he does end up being a hero. He doesn't do really anything heroic, but he is the hero in the end.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
We mentioned this before, but this film was seemingly shot in one take. There was a lot of camera trickery to do this, but they did have a ton of really long and grueling shots. Um, the film has one like fade to black where Schofield gets knocked out in a gunfight when he arrives at a city, and he gets fired upon by a German, almost like a sniper, but I don't think he's being sniped at, just shot at from like a high vantage point. Um, Sam Mendes says that this scene breaks the film into two movements. There's the afternoon to dusk, and then the night to dawn, and that's a very thematic like fall and then rise for Schofield as a character. Um, uh, Most of this film was shot in England. The scene we have on screen here of Schofield's run was shot in the Salisbury Plains, which is where Stonehenge is. There are a lot of white rocks there. You'll probably like, if you think white rocks, you might think of like the cliffs of Dover, but this exists all over the British Isles. Um, and a survey had to be done before they started filming here to make sure that they weren't going to disturb any like Neolithic structures or whatever that were in the area with all of their like effects and like digging trenches and shit.
Yeah, I was particularly struck when they got to this scene, and or this area, and the sun's out, and it's bright and shiny day, and the grass is all green, which is totally different from the line where he came from, where
Yes.
it had been shelled to hell and back, and everything was dead. Um so this is just the way that these lines were and the way it worked. It was different like that, but at the same time the contrast was very great. And I mean, I wonder how much of that was done to convey a theme, rather than of this like sunny dawn of him trying to save the day before it all goes to shit. um or if that was based on any kind of like actual evidence of this area.
I think part of it was definitely the uh having it be more cheerful, more bright, more inviting to better capture his heroics and the hope that he has of saving all these people. Um, because everybody that's running into the front, his lives are in their hands. Once he gives the orders that this needs to stop, the Germans are springing a trap. He saves a ton of people.
Hmm. Or at least we're given that impression, because it
Yeah,
certainly seems like a lot of people die as well.
yes. Whether or not that's he shows up late, but he was stopped at many points. Um,
Yeah.
he was fired upon. We didn't really talk about the village that was on fire that he was running through. Um, he runs through a village that's on fire and finds a French woman and a child, and gives them some milk that he found earlier, and whatever else he has. This is really his last uh his last stand before he knows he has to like deliver it, or
Hmm.
he's dead.
Yeah. Well, and it's after he wakes up from his, concussion, so he's not quite thinking exactly clearly about like what he has to do. And
Hmm.
it was another I also had kind of a problem with that scene, because it's one of those situations where you have people talking to each other in different languages and really should not be able to understand, and they seem to understand each other pretty well. So, just a little pet peeve
Yeah,
of Caitlin.
I mean, I've never talked to somebody that I don't share at least some language with, and I I know sometimes they're taught phrases and things, but I don't know, if I was concussed, I think I'd have a hard enough time speaking English.
Yeah. Yeah, so that part was a little inaccurate to me.
It's something I notice in a lot of war movies, is that they at least take some time to show like the civilians. Um,
Mhm.
All Quiet on the Western Front does that in its iterations as well. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and even though I said earlier on, this had a much lower impact on civilians, because it did in a much smaller land area. It affected people, but it did still affect people,
yeah.
strongly. And um yeah, that was a good scene of, people trying to pick up from the pieces, and another reminder that, despite war knocking on your door, sometimes it's hard to leave your home.
Yeah.
um and I think that was a good, like, little interlude to that.
So a little bit more on the long take, because I really like it. I think it adds a whole lot to this film and a lot of other films that it is a part of. A few years before this, the film Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, that came out, and that was Michael Keaton on a stage show, and Edward Norton was in it, and some other people. Um, and that was shot to make it look like it was all one take. It wasn't, but that's camera trickery, and obviously you don't want to make a film that's 2 hours in one take. Uh, Smaller scale things have been done before, and then longer scale things. Andy Warhol pointed a video camera at the Empire State Building for like 5 or 9 hours, and that was a movie. I don't think that's a good example of something that's a long take. Um,
No, it's not, Garrett. That's
or
terrible.
yeah, to get at British censors for something someone made a film that was just paint drying that was 6 hours and made them watch that. I think that's. I'm not saying it's not art, but it sounds like it sucks. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it could be art, but it could be bad art too.
Yes. So one I have seen that is a film that's shot all in one take is Russian Ark from 2002, which is a 96-minute tour through Russian history, that they go through the Hermitage Museum. and they show all different like scenes. Like it's framed as like a group of like people going through the history of a whole country in this one building. Um, they one interesting fact about that is they only had one night to film it, and they had done like I think 3 or 4 takes where they had made a blunder in the first 5 minutes, and then the next take they were able to go through the whole thing. However, all of the audio had to be redone because the people behind the camera were doing nothing but swearing for the entirety of the film, just because of all the choreography and everything that had to go right. There were, I think, 2 or 3 big bands in it, and many scenes of like dances and old parties and things like that. It's a very interesting movie, and I think it does well with this idea of doing something in one take. However, that's like the gimmick to it. Outside of that, I don't think the movie has a lot of plot.
Yeah. But it sounds very interesting. It sounds like something I would like to watch, and maybe our viewers would too.
It's very artistic.
Hmm.
I will say that much. I don't think it's much of a story, but it is very artistic. It's very beautiful and well presented. Um, this has also been done a lot in television and films to like shorter extents of doing like 10 or 12 minute long scenes. One of my favorite comes from the first season of True Detective, where they do a like raid or heist in the projects, and it's filmed on our friend the Steadicam going through different buildings and having Matthew McConaughey drag a guy around. It's one of my favorite scenes from the show, and I go back and watch that one frequently because it's a lot of fun. Um, Anytime you're doing like a lot of effects and having a lot of people, it's very difficult to coordinate all that. So at any rate, the long takes are an incredible feat of direction.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed the True Detective one also.
And it's just so much fun. It's so high energy and action.
Yeah, so going back to 1917, I think my favorite scenes of the long take. So the thing that it does, and we've already talked about it, is the immersion of being in the trenches and following them through no man's land and then into the other trenches, and you're following these guys as they go on this pathway, and they're it's a maze and it's terrible, and they're corpses and everything. But the scenes that I thought were the best were when they were in the farm with the trees and the orchard, and the plane comes in, because you're sitting there, and you're like, the plane is coming at you, and you're like, oh, I gotta scramble away, because like, oh my god, because you're put in the same position as them.
Yeah,
And they were in, that was one of those kind of like low moments of like low energy, of like, okay, we can rest, we can drink some of this milk, we can chill out. And then the plane comes in, and like that all happens. And when Thomas gets stabbed, he that's actually off camera, because we're following William to the water fountain to get the water. And so, and then you like spin, and the way that the camera kind of goes around the scene, I mean, it's really beautiful. It was really
yes.
well done. I think that, as even if it is a gimmick, like, this was a great way to use the gimmick in a way that was artistic. It
Hmm.
didn't take away, it added to the scene. It created an intimacy with the characters. It was like you became a character as well, in a way.
Yeah, you felt like you were there witnessing it.
Hmm. Yeah, it was a really solid choice. And I went into this movie knowing that that was going to happen, and I didn't realize how good it was going to be until, like, I think it was that scene where I was like, yes, this was the right choice. This was incredible. What a way to do a movie like this.
Yeah, one of the scenes I really liked was earlier on in the film where they're going through like the crater, and the camera is like over the water in the crater, but you don't see like any kind of displacement or anything, and they're like climbing around the outside of it and pulling each other up. That was the scene where I was like, I'm here. I'm in the crater in no man's land. I'm in hell.
Yeah. Oh, terrible. Just really, and it was hell. It was hell. World War One in those trenches on the front line in no man's land was hell.
Absolutely. So a couple more scenes about this, or a couple more facts about this scene while we have it on screen. Um, this was filmed with 500 extras, and they did, I think, 2 or 3 takes of this of Schofield running across the field. In the second take, he runs into people who are running out of the trenches, and that wasn't planned. That wasn't really in the script, but he does it a couple times, and he said it was, an inevitability. It was going to happen, but like he picked himself up and he just ran with it. Like that
Hmm.
was it was accurate. It was,
Yeah.
it was chaotic. It was
Hmm.
unplanned. It was
Well, and as the viewer, you're with him, you're trying to dodge them. You're like, "Oh no, he's going to get stabbed by the bayonet." Like, and I think that, and this is one of the problems with movies like this is that you don't think that, or that the lead character is going to survive. And I think that war movies, like, sometimes, that doesn't happen.
right.
And in this movie, I think that at least, like, I mean, I figured he was going to be okay, but I mean, like, he could have gotten stabbed, or something else terrible happened. Like, the movie was so immersive, I never thought to myself, "Oh, he's going to get through this."
Right. I didn't have any idea that Thomas was going to get stabbed and die.
No.
I
No.
that came out of left field to me. I thought they were just going
Yeah,
to like pull the German from the plane and then just walk away, but no.
or kill him and
Yeah.
have like that kind of moment, like a similar scene in All Quiet on the Western Front. I think that I also thought it was surprising that it happened so early in the movie. Um, because
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it was probably in the first third that he dies, and to have like two-thirds of a movie be really only one character, like, that's a lot.
And I didn't think Schofield was the main character initially.
Right.
I
Yeah.
really thought it was Thomas because he was, he had a personal stake. It was to
Mm-hmm.
save his brother. And I was like,
And
okay,
yeah, he also had more personality. Like, he had something to him. Schofield was
yes.
way more stoic and quiet, and more logical, more like, I don't want to do this. Because I mean, especially in the beginning, it's reasonable for him to just be like, okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to just like ride on this truck to wherever, because like this is a fool's errand where I'm never gonna get there.
Mhm.
And Thomas had way more incentive to complete the mission than Schofield did.
Absolutely. So I guess we can talk to wrap up the discussion of 1917 about the inevitable descent into madness that all of these characters go through.
Yeah.
Um, Once we get to that second half of the movie where he's going through the city that's on fire, he's constantly being chased around. He's on high alert. He runs into a guy, doesn't know if he's friend or foe, gets shot at, runs away, finds another guy, 2 guys that are drunk, stabs them, runs away, finds the French woman and the child, is chased out of there, jumps into a freezing cold river, climbs over a mountain of bodies, and just is all sorts of shocked and trauma ridden that he just about collapses, entirely once he finds allies.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the burning city scenes were, like the scene that's on the screen right now. All you can see is the light of the fire and shadows and people, and I think he kills a guy with his bare hands.
Yeah, he
In that,
strangles. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like the depravity of war, and the lengths that you're willing to go through, and the insanity that possesses you. Like he should have, like, as soon as he encountered that woman, he should have got the fuck out of there and moved on. He shouldn't have given her all his shit. You know, like that's not the logical thing to do, but emotionally in the moment, like with his concussion or whatever, like that's what he thought he should do. And luckily he had milk, which I mean that was the one thing that, you know, you should actually give to her. Um and then, yeah, the running, I completely forgot about the pile of bodies, Garrett. Like, oh my God.
So
Like, that was just horrifying.
where they filmed that, they had to put up signs around to say, "Hey, these are props," to
Yeah.
stop like the public from freaking out. Um,
Yeah.
and like you got to remember, this is April. That water is going to be freezing cold.
Yeah.
This is not a sunny summer day.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as dumb as the plot might have been, like I don't think that there would be a way to capture all of these things in a different movie and with a different plot. Like he had to, you know, go through all these trials to get to the place, and you know, each thing is worse than the last.
Yeah, absolutely. In many ways, falling through the waterfall, climbing over the corpses, that's, worse than, going through even a deserted no man's land.
Yeah, yeah, you know, the no man's land man, the going through no man's land with a friend, then seeing that friend die, then going through this, you know, terrible, you know, city on fire where you're getting shot at and then killing somebody and then having to crawl through a pile of corpses in order to get to woods to then, you know, realize that you were too late. Like, oh my God.
I I
And
w-
then, yeah, go on.
I will say the only problem I have with that part of the film is I watch things with subtitles, because I'm a millennial with probable ADHD and need, Subway Surfer on the bottom of all the screens. The lyrics for them singing the song came in long before I could hear it or see it. Um,
Yeah.
and that, I don't think that ruined anything for me, but that made me like anticipate something that I think would have been a better reveal had the subtitles not kicked in so soon, or had
Uh-huh.
the audio been balanced accordingly on my TV. But
Yeah.
we've
Well,
talked about this
so
a number of times.
yeah, and so I was watching it on the airplane and I couldn't figure out how to turn the subtitles on. Like I tried for like 5 minutes and gave up. So I didn't have the subtitles, which I would have wanted, because the sound balancing was not great. And I remember hearing that music and thinking that it was just atmospheric, you know,
Right.
not like some guy singing. And it was kind of really pleasant to see some guy singing later on,
Yeah.
especially because all those soldiers sitting around, like watching, I totally thought they were dead, you know,
Yeah, I
like,
I did too.
but I mean, they were dead men walking because they
Hmm.
were going into that. And you know, that's the bottom line of World War I. Was it was a war of attrition. And you know, how many men can you throw at the situation before it's over?
The answer is too many.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose that's a decent transition into All Quiet on the Western Front,
Yes.
which is a movie about, you know, how many men can you throw at the line before it is unsustained.
Yes. So All Quiet on the Western Front is based on a book written in 1929. There are a number of adaptations of this book into films. I watched the 1930s adaptation recently. I've also seen the latest one on Netflix, which is primarily the one we're going to talk about, that was released last year in 2022. There was also a made-for-TV movie in 1979 and a song by Elton John of the same name. So this book came out at a very interesting time in history. 1929. Uh, World War One had been over for a decade at this point, but things were heating up in Europe to start World War Two. Hitler was already in power. It was already a bad time. This book was banned in Germany and burned hundreds and hundreds of copies, but not before the American film industry could make a movie out of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't banned here, was it?
No, it was not banned in America. However, there's a couple interesting things about the director that I think we'll get to on our next slide. Um, so primarily, we're going to talk about the 2022 version. This was made and distributed on Netflix. It had a budget of $20 million, which is not a lot at all.
Yeah, that's small. Holy crap.
It did have a small limited release in movie theaters. In order for streaming movies to have the ability to be in the award shows, they have to be displayed publicly at some number of theaters for some length of time. And Netflix knew they were cooking with something here, so they decided to uh, put it in theaters for a bit. It's a big action movie. It has a lot to offer, and I think I would have enjoyed to see it in the movie theater. However, when it came out, that was 2022, not necessarily the best time to go to a movie theater.
Yeah, I'm happy to have watched it at home. I don't think that it would have greatly improved by a movie theater, though the sound is something in this movie, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
talk about that more later on.
So the movie has a few deviations from the book. The whole like armistice talks plotline in the film, that wasn't in there. Um,
Right.
they removed and changed and morphed some characters. Um, but it won a bunch of awards. It won the best international film, the best score, production design, and cinematography. That was just at the Academy. There were tons of other awards from other institutions on it. And Netflix said that when it released, had logged 150 million watch hours worldwide. It was at the top of their trending for a long time, and then came back once it was nominated for the Academy Awards and the BAFTAs, the British Academy Awards.
Yeah, and I think all of these awards on this one were well deserved. It was an incredibly well done movie. It is in German, so you have to do subtitles, but I barely noticed because I use subtitles all the time anyway. Um, I thought that the cinematography was incredible. The story is, I read the book in high school, and I remember pieces of it. I don't remember it in its entirety.
Mm.
And we'll talk about some of the scenes that I remember the most, which they did put in the movie. And yeah, I mean, it was really good. I can't believe they did it on that low a budget, especially compared to 1917. Um, Really good job.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I really was.
I
Um,
think that, it's probably because of the lack of sets. I mean, you have the war area, the trench, you have the field where the farmhouse is, and then you have the town at the end, and then the train car where they do the negotiations. So I think that that contributes to a low budget.
yeah.
um but I mean, there were lots of extras, there's lots of props, they did a great job of making it look like World War II, I mean World War I,
Hmm.
with their garb and their stuff, all the equipment, really really good job.
Yeah, this is a phenomenal movie. Um, to preface some of the conversation we'll be having, I decided to include a quote. This is also the what the 1930s film starts with is just this image. This story is neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure. For death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will try simply to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped its shells, were destroyed by the war. And I think this is an excellent way to start talking about the German perspective in World War One.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. And it certainly puts into perspective why it was banned in Germany too, because, this is a movie about a bunch of kids who sign up to go to war, and the shit that happens to them, and it's not good. So
Even
as a
at the time, the story was viewed widely as anti-war, and the
yeah,
film just as much.
as
Um,
it should be.
I think there was a quote from Variety at the time that it came out that said something along the lines of, if you show this and get it in the hands of the League of Nations, there'll never be another war again, which, you can understand. Um,
Yeah.
this film was shot and then edited to have the ability to put in any language they wanted. This was one of the first war movies that had dialogue. It was one of the first talkie movies. Uh, in 1930, this will probably be the earliest movie we ever talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was directed in here in America and stars a bunch of American actors. Um, it is all in English, so you don't have to worry about subtitles. Not that I could get those to work. It was directed by Louis Millstone, who was a Russian and made tons and tons of movies in this era, and then up until he got canceled for the McCarthyism, worrying about communists and liberals and anti-war people, um, and that was a part of where his directorial career ended.
That
Um,
sucks.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's awful. So initially, when this film came out, there were controversies galore. Many groups disliked it because of its anti-war message. At the time, Joseph Goebbels, who was a big guy in the Nazi Party, behind a lot of the propaganda film and all sorts of things, was responsible for disrupting viewings of the films. He would send people in with stink bombs and mice and itching powder, had people screaming and calling it a Jewish film. It was banned in Australia by their Minister of Films on the grounds of it being pacifism. And then in 1931, it was banned in Italy and Austria. It was very clear that this book, this movie, they didn't want it getting out. They didn't want people having, the view and knowledge of how absolutely terrible this war was. Um, you know, we we talk about Vietnam and we talk about other soldiers and we talk about PTSD, and these were all things that like people had back then. People did not want to
Hmm.
talk about their experience in the war because of how traumatic it was. So to have this depiction, and even in 1930, an absolutely gruesome depiction, it really could have turned everyone off of this idea and been like, I'm not supporting anything like that.
Right. Yeah, and imagine how different the world would be if we had taken this seriously. I mean, at the same time, you said that Netflix logged 150 million hours of All Quiet on the Western Front. Like how many of those people who've watched it on Netflix are participating in one of several wars going on in the world today? I think it's a fun thing to think that maybe this book or this movie could have impacted World War II enough to not make it happen. At the same time, I think that, we are more sympathetic than most people, not most people, but the people that are doing this, the people
Right.
that are telling those guys to go over that wall and go fire on those men, like they're not going to stop.
Yeah, and I think that brings us really into the first part and the opening of the movie, the recruitment of the children. This is something that in the 1930s version and the 2022 version are nearly identical, of having a fanatic teacher preach to the children at a school how like much honor and glory to the fatherland you would bring by going out and serving.
Yeah, and I mean this is something that we need to think about in this world where in 2023 where, people call other people Nazis and, who are racist or anti-Semite or, whatever. Um that in these wars in World War One and World War Two, the Germans who were fighting on the ground were not necessarily though did not necessarily have those values, and many of them were young. They were 17, 18 years old and had been fed a propaganda machine unlike anything that we have ever encountered in America with our freedom, our even our level of freedom of speech and misinformation in the news, and all of that is totally different to the totalitarianism that was going on in Germany, the brainwashing,
Mhm.
the and you see it happening in real time in this movie of like convincing these kids that they were going to go do this thing and it's going to be honorable and glory and all of this, and they're going to kill the Frenchman or whatever, and then they get there and it is quite different, and all of that propaganda is just trying to get bodies into the field.
Yeah, there's an excellent scene at the start of the 2022 version where they're getting their uniforms, and there's a
Hmm.
person that's just ripping off the old name tags of people who
Yeah.
had died, and they're just recycling it for the next guys. It's gruesome. It is a conveyor belt of lives that they're sending at the front.
Yeah, and all for nothing, really. And I think that that's the bottom line. And that's why this movie, was banned, is because it shows that ultimately this was all worthless, that all of those
Yes.
lives were lost for nothing. And these poor kids, who went in with so many hopes and dreams, were just destroyed.
Yeah. So in the 1930s version, there's an interesting parallel to this first scene where Paul gets to go home for I think it's furlough, where they just get to go home for like a week, and he goes and he sees his teacher giving another one of these rousing speeches to the students, and his teacher like brings him in and it's like, oh Paul, I preached to you, and you went up and took up the war. Tell all the kids how like great and heroic and all this, and he just is like he tells them the reality. Like he tells them it's the trenches. He tells them it's it's awful, and people and the children are just like, you're a coward, like you're a loser, like you're not the hero that we're told exists. And it is upsetting because all of those kids are brainwashed, and much like Paul is at the start, he's brainwashed, and then the first night they get to the front, one of his friends dies, and
Yeah.
then they're in there and they're in the bunker just quivering in fear the whole time as they're being shelled to hell and back. Like,
Yeah.
there's no room for heroics here. There's nobody on the horses, manning the charge or anything like that.
Yeah. There is, and very quickly, there the old timers stand out as the people who've, made it so far, and it's quick for that to happen to Paul as the guy who manages to live. And I mean, all of this is about managing to live till the end. Um, and it is dreadful.
So a big part of uh, both versions of this film are the very simple, like mundane things the soldiers have to do, and one of them is eat.
Yeah.
Um, in the 1930s film, they get to the front and they meet Cat, who is also in the 2022 film, and he's just like, I have food. If you want some food, you have to pay me for it. And these are all like really naive kids, and they pull out money, and he's like, money's not worth anything here. and he trades them cigarettes and soap and that sort of thing for parts of a hog that they've stolen from the like main mess hall type thing. And in the 2022 version, they go and they steal a swan from local farmers, and that's despicable in many ways. But these people, they didn't have food. They were so underprepared and starved out, and we see that a little bit in the 1917, where they're like scrounging through the bunker for like rations or something to eat.
Yeah, and I mean, also want to point out that, stealing from the local farm when you're at war is a time-honored tradition going
Yes.
back
Yes.
thousands of years.
Yes.
So, like, while that might be despicable, on the other hand, I mean, starving people are going to steal food.
Yes.
And so this is the part of the book that I remember most of all. Like, I remember very little of like the descriptions of the trenches and the shelling and stuff like that. I remember them stealing the food and them cooking the food together, and that being such a unifying moment of, and because they were on. So what would happen is your troop would get moved from the front to the back to give you a break. So you'd be moved off the front line to the back, and you wanted to be on the back where, you were peeling potatoes and you were able to eat and you were able to rest and you were able to, flirt with the French women and those kinds of things. And I remember like that, the brotherhood that because he goes into this war with his classmates,
Yeah.
and by this point in the movie there's not many of them left, and now he has new brothers in arms from fighting this war.
Yeah, we see just like as time goes on, the people that he knows getting like picked off until Paul gets to the point where he was at the beginning, where it's just like you're surrounded by new recruits.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
the
because
industrial war machine.
yeah, that was the war machine of World War One. Was it was just people. It was just throwing people after people after people at a situation, and the technology was not quite, it was there, but it wasn't. They had airplanes, but they weren't good enough to do anything. They had tanks, but they weren't good enough to do anything. They had the gases, and those were good enough to do stuff, but then they also killed your own people.
So
So yeah.
this was interesting. In the 1930s version, there's no gas. They're not carrying around gas masks or anything like that. Um,
Wow.
I think maybe part of that was, that would be a difficult thing to film.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger thing is at that point we had the Geneva Conventions and all agreed that we need to outlaw all of this. So I
Yeah.
think that was probably more prevalent in the minds of people then as being like
Yeah.
something that was outlawed in there that they just didn't want to show. Um,
Yeah, well, and I think that, the reason why it doesn't show up as much as it should in the 2022 version is just for how horrifying it was, and how, terrible and awful. Like, they have a scene where they tell them to put on their masks and they don't do it fast enough, and they joke around about it. And then there's a scene later on where they come across just a room full of corpses because they took off their masks too quickly. But we don't see them actually dying from the gas. And that is a good thing in my mind, because I
yeah,
don't want to see that,
I
because it is so terrible.
it's one of those things like we've talked about before where the reality of you thinking how it happened is more terrifying than it would be.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, filmography wise, it might have been interesting to see the fog come in. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, ultimately I'm good.
um, I don't know if this is in the 2022 version, but in the 1930s version, they have a scene where they go and they get some bread and they have sausages from their their stop of being away from the front. So many of the men in this company had died that the cook had made twice as much food as they needed to. So these guys were on a surplus and happy about it. They were happy that they got extra food, but that meant the cost of 80 other men in their company.
Wow.
Just
Yeah.
awful. But they take some of the food that they have and they trade it to these French women for the movie implies sexual favors, I think. Um,
Yeah, there was
which
a small scene like that in 2022 where one of the
okay,
guys takes some food and runs off with some women who were very clearly walking close enough to the camp to get attention to, perhaps sell some favors. And it was implied heavily that he took advantage of that.
I see. Yeah, I think I
That
remember a scarf or something that he
Yes,
gets.
yeah, the
Okay.
scarf that he takes home from that it becomes like a talisman through the rest of the movie, which I think
Um,
is a good touch, especially
yeah,
because in the 2022 version, Paul never goes home. There's very little interaction with anybody on the outside, and I think I mean, it doesn't overemphasize, but it really emphasizes the alienation of being on the front lines and on this like in this terrible situation and just awfulness.
yeah. There was a sequel to the book that was written that was specifically about following these characters going back into like their ordinary lives and not being able to. That was touched on parts in at least the 1930s version, but yeah, not as much in the 2022 version.
No, no, the 22 version ends at 11:11 pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have again the inevitable descent into madness. Everybody goes fucking crazy in this
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, this is rough because not only do you have the people on the ground, realizing that so the descent into madness very ironically comes at the heels of the armistice of like, oh, it's going to end. We don't have to do this anymore. It's over.
Mhm.
And then, so they're going around and there are so many people who are hurt and sick and really effed up and everybody's mentally just fucked in the head, just totally. And then they're commanded to go back to the lines and fight again.
Yeah, I think this was something that was changed from the book because this wasn't in the 1930s version of trying to have one last victory in the war before they blew the whistle, um,
Yeah,
which
I don't
is
know. I
awful.
I would have to go back and read it again because I would because it makes sense with the all quiet on the Western Front. That moment of the truce is
Mhm.
all quiet and it's all over. And it makes sense for them to be one last push before that happens. And it is a horrifying, adrenaline rich moment of filmography following Paul through that final battle.
Mhm. I'd like to talk about a couple scenes in the 1930s version that I thought were pretty horrific. Um, they do a lot of trench warfare and like blowing shit up and having guys running through the trenches and fighting each other and stabbing each other. But there's one scene where a guy gets blown up and the only thing left of him are two hands clutching on barbed wire. And that made me think of uh, Saving Private Ryan more than any other scene in the movie. That was crazy. I didn't think they would do such a thing in the 1930s.
Yeah, that's awful.
Um, there were, however, many like I think very well shot scenes. There was one where they're in this, camaraderie of like, yeah, it's going to be over soon, hopefully, and they're at like more of like a bar, and they're staring at this poster of a one of the people who came of a woman who came to perform. So like at some of these places to keep morale up, they would have like dancers or singers or things like that come through to give the soldiers a treat. We still do that today. Having comedians or musicians or whoever come and give our troops like a rallying moment. Um, and it's just these two guys, I think Paul's one of them, who are looking at this poster, and the scene is shot so they're like they're filming a mirror, so like it's an interesting parallel of like neither one of these people are really in the scene and they're staring at just like this poster and having this fantasy, and how much of like a mirrored reality that they're in of just like, oh, if we were here like a week before we would have really had our spirits lifted, but that doesn't matter because this poster's doing it for me. It was very strange. There was a lot of like really good art in the movie. I was surprised. I'm used to seeing like a lot of older films and them being just like pretty bland, uh,
Yeah.
because especially at this point, and up until you get to like something like Citizen Kane or Alfred Hitchcock, a lot of the black and white movies didn't have so much like artistic talent behind them, but this one absolutely did. I think it won some awards for it.
Yeah, yeah, that's such an interesting idea, and I really like that. And there's actually a bunch of art. There's a painting by Matisse from the Impressionist era of a woman and a bartender looking in a mirror that is very similar, I think, in theme. And that's immediately the first thing that came to my mind.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so that's really interesting. But it really captures that, like, I mean, these guys are crazy. Like, they're hallucinating. They're grasping at straws to try to capture any kind of joy.
Yeah, one thing that gets repeated from 1917 is talking about like the cherry trees, is talking about like the orchards or the farms that these people worked on. Because, there's at this point, there's really not so much a thing as like a career soldier. Like all of these people were like drafted or volunteered and are, they have lives to return to. And I think the older version does a little bit better of a job capturing those lives, but even in the 2022 version, um, Paul has to read letters to Kat because he can't read to hear about like his life and what's going on with his wife and child.
Hmm.
It does a lot to really humanize these people and remind us that, yeah, these are, your neighbor, your mailman, you know.
Yeah, yeah, these are just Joe Schmo. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, poor guys, poor kids.
Yeah, that was one thing that bothered me in the 1930s version is they didn't try very hard to get people that look like kids. um, but growing up in the early 2000s, I'm very used to watching like teen drama shows with people who are in their like 20s. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, this 32-year-old high school student. Yeah,
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 that,
yeah,
that that's
yeah.
that's something we're never really going to get over.
But I do think that the 2022 version did a great job of casting very
Yes.
innocent looking young actors who did a great job of emoting and acting and developing an absolutely dead look in their eyes as as the movie progressed. And the actors that come together kind of at the end, like the middle to the end, all had a great synergy together,
They
and
did.
they all had weird personalities, and you could tell that also, like, these people wouldn't actually be friends, if they weren't trauma bonded together from going through this, horrific situation that they went through.
Yeah, that is a great way to describe it, trauma bonding.
Oh yeah. No, being in the military is being trauma bonded. That is all it is. It's terrible. But that's also the way it's always been. So,
Mhm.
it's part of our human condition to, be very, very uh vocal about where the border for an imaginary line should be.
Right. In this film, in both versions, there are scenes that take place in hospitals where like they're going to check on their friends and like what has happened to them. And one thing that was very popular in World War I of like dealing with wounds and things was to amputate people.
Yeah.
Um, so, and this was, you know, a part of World War II as well. Uh, I know in some of Sergio Leone's films of like doing the spaghetti westerns, like Clint Eastwood movies. He employed many people who were, you know, veterans of these wars who were handicapped, like in shit. I think it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's a guy walking around that doesn't have either of his legs, and it's a good parallel to, um, you know, the Civil War and like people just being amputated in that. You know, later on we'll go to you know, Vietnam and then in Cambodia, all of these people who are getting, you know, their legs blown off and shit like that. I mean, even continuing into our war in Iraq of, you know, the landmines and the explosive devices and Jeremy Renner, like people are getting
Hmm.
blown to bits and losing limbs. And in this film, that is seen as like the end for some of them. In both versions, people kill themselves over like being not whole anymore, of
Hmm.
losing so much of yourself that you know you can't go on. And
Yeah, well, and I think that in the pre-war world too, like being a cripple could be a death sentence for certain social classes. You
oh
know,
yeah,
if you're a poor person and you're a cripple, you're not making a living. There's no Medicare, there's no veterans benefits, there's no disability pay. And then too, you know, in Nazi Germany, they euthanized lots of disabled people for,
oh yeah,
you know, so imagine you're a World War One veteran in Germany without any legs, and the Nazis euthanize you because you know, can't be part of their, you know, high society of Naziness. Like, oh God, what a vicious cycle of doom this the whole thing was.
yeah. I didn't even consider the euthanasia aspect when I was watching the movie. I didn't, you know, I obviously knew that they did that, but I forgot that like honestly killing yourself now might spare you something far worse in you know, 15 to 20 years if you make it that
Yeah,
far to begin with.
yeah, you know, kill yourself now, you don't become a Nazi. Pretty positive. You know, if you were Paul, if you were Paul Atreides and you could see in the future and you're like, oh God, I'm not going to become a giant worm. I'm going to become a Nazi. I'm going to kill myself.
He becomes a Nazi anyway.
Well, yeah.
Shit, that was Dune spoilers. We can't be doing that.
You know, fascism versus fascism is just fascism. Anyway, yeah, so that's dark.
Yeah,
This
so
whole thing is dark. It's all dark, Garrett.
yeah, it is, but you know what isn't dark? Music and sound effects.
Oh, I totally forgot to put in the slide. I totally was
Oh,
expecting the what did we learn slide to
oh,
come up next.
okay.
I was prepared. Like I thought that was
Whoops.
a good transition. Whoopsies. So, one thing so the 2022 version
The transitions have been all over the place. They were really good for a while, and then that one did throw me for a loop, but I'll take it.
sorry, I that's cuz I didn't have the next slide up on my screen.
Okay.
So the music in this one, I remember when it was at the Academy Awards because this was the Academy Awards where what's his face got punched in the face.
Chris
So I was
Rock got
watching it.
slapped by Will Smith.
Yeah.
You know,
So
sorry, but like if we're gonna talk about it, like me and my roommate watched Men in Black like a year after that happened, and like the whole time I was sitting there, I was like, I can't unsee it anymore. It's honestly like watching something with Kevin Spacey now. I can't watch it without going,
Ooh,
wow, that's a tremendous piece of shit on screen right now.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. It's hard. It is burned into my memory. I was watching it live too.
Oh
Like
my
I
God, I
and
was
I
watching it live. It was amazing.
Yeah, yeah, because like I don't normally watch the Oscars, and I just happened to be watching it that night, and like bam, I was like, "Oh my God, is this really happening? Did that really happen? Oh my God."
Well, like
Yeah.
the audio cut out, and I had to like Google around for what did he say, and then as I'm doing that, he gets up on the stage and hits a guy, like, and then he goes on to win Best Actor.
Yeah, yeah, that was a moment. That was a moment. None of it was handled well.
Oh
Let's
my
just say that.
God.
Yeah. Yeah, that I yeah. I mean, if we want to take a tangent here, I don't think that they should have let him up on
No,
stage. They should have allowed literally anyone else to accept the award on his behalf.
they should have taken him out of there.
Yeah, I mean, you can't commit violence, like that in a public space and not expect to be removed from the public space. No, I mean it's not a public space, it's a private space. You can't commit violence like that. You just
Yeah.
can't. Like, and that was a bad move, and it was not good, and it perpetuated so many terrible stereotypes of so many different people, and it was just a real mess. And yeah, I hope that we've learned from that, but I don't know if we have. um so yeah.
So this film did win an Academy Award for the best original score and a BAFTA for the best original score.
So why I brought up the Oscars is that I remember watching the Oscars, this winning that award, but also when they do the Best Picture nominees songs over the course of the Oscars, which I think is really dumb. I
Yes.
was struck by the music from this film, and I remember that, and I was like, that's interesting. I like it, but it's interesting, and I wonder, and this was all before I'd seen the movie, and I wonder how that interacts. And because I am somebody who loves electronic music, who loves a synthesizer, who loves disturbing noises, like the noises that the aliens make in War of the Worlds, the Tom Cruise one,
Mhm.
I think those are some of the best alien noises there ever were, because they're so disturbing, they're so inhuman. And I think that this score, it captures just a very inhuman element. But on the other hand, I think that it works very well during the battle scenes. And like when the tanks are coming in and when they're
Yeah.
going over the trenches, I think that the sound is amazing. But I didn't necessarily like it all the time. And I thought it was kind of off-putting and took me out of the moment at times. And I didn't care for that.
Yeah, because if I remember right, it like really seems to repeat itself a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Um,
very repetitive, which it makes sense for this movie because they're just keep doing the same dumb shit over and over and over, expecting a different, you know,
yeah,
thing to happen.
they're fighting over the same 4 inches for 10 years. Well, not that long.
Yeah,
Sorry, several years.
for four. It was
Four
4-year war.
4 years.
But yeah, they're fighting over 10 inches over four years. I mean, that's a dumb, dumb, dumb fight.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so I just wanted to like bring up the music as a like I liked it in theory. I wish it had been more nuanced and slightly different.
Hmm.
But at the same time, like I listened to the soundtrack today, and it gave me the goosebumps. So like, it's something there.
Yeah, I think it worked well. From everything I
Yeah.
remember. Uh,
And then the effects in this movie
ooh,
are incredible.
yes.
I don't know how much of it was CGI, how much of it was makeup, how much of it was physical effects, but I never was taken out of the moment to wonder about that. There was never a moment of me going like, ew, that CGI was bad, or like something like that. And that happens to me all the time because I can't deal with bad CGI. I would
Right.
rather have a puppet than a stupid, cartoon Boba Fett any day. And I think they did a really good job here. And they also did a great job in what the final scene before. So I think it's the second to last time that Paul goes over to No Man's Land, and it's the one with the tanks and the flamethrowers. Like as
Yes.
he goes through it and comes back, the like disheveledness, the mud on his face, the grime, all of that building up and changing over the course of that scene. I thought that was incredibly well done.
Yes, I can vividly remember many scenes of just like the makeup and how these guys look, and just how they're caked in mud and blood and yuck.
Yeah, and the colors of it too. Like
Yes.
it wasn't just like drab brown. It was like a mossy green, and there's blood and it's red, and there's blues, and I mean it was so well balanced and nuanced, and in a way very beautiful.
Hmm.
There was a lot of artistic beauty in all of that, and even though it was, just terrible. Um yeah. Yeah, and I also wanted to bring up the scene to compare 1917 and All Quiet in the modern version. The scenes where they both kill a man with their bare hands. And I think that those scenes, because they're both in these kind of like descent into madness portions of the film where, survival at all costs is where it's at,
Yeah.
and there's, they don't want to do it and they're struggling, but they have to do it to get through. And in All Quiet, the response of like the because he's in this shell hole in the ground and
Yeah.
there's water, but he's trying to stay out of the water because there's terrible shit in that water.
You don't know how deep
um
it is either.
don't know how deep it is. There could be mustard gas in there. Like, it's real bad. And he kills this guy with his bare hands, but he's still kind of alive, and he goes through this moment of regret
Hmm.
and fear and tries to save him and then tries to kill him again. And that range of emotion in that shell hole is just an incredible work of art. And I think that, that scene alone could have won all the awards for me.
Yeah, that was really excellent. The 1930s film has a scene that very much, is the same, but nowhere near as well done, I think. It's a little
Hmm.
hokey. Um,
Yeah, because, as you're watching him, and that's the thing, when you're watching All Quiet on the Western Front, you're reading the book, you are very much on this kid's side, and you're put in the part of being this German soldier, and you're very much, like anything, you're cheering for him to win, you're cheering for him to live, and going through this moment of, nearly getting killed and then killing and like then trying to save, and you're like, no, you should be trying to save him because you're at war and he tried to kill you, and I think he was an officer of some kind too. So, like it was just the terrible switches of emotion, and just like going back and forth, and like, war is bad.
yeah, it is. It really is. Um, so I guess that's what we learned.
Yeah. Yeah, more than anything, these two movies teach us that trench warfare is really fucking dumb. And, telling a bunch of 17-year-olds with guns and bayonets to run across a field where you're getting shot at, and then if you finally get to the other side, you stab a guy in the face. Like, what the fuck, man?
Yeah, just at times you think it's unbelievable because of how we conduct war now, that we used to do it like this. And even before that, it was, we just line up several guys in a field and point the, muskets at them. Don't shoot until you can see the whites of their eyes. War has always been awful, but I hesitate to say it's really ever been worse than the world wars, the great wars. Um,
Yeah, and I think that this kind of warfare is way worse. I can't imagine the fear of climbing up that ladder. I
Well,
can't imagine doing that. There's nothing that would have made me do that.
well, because it's not even climbing the ladder. You peek over it, you might be shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, just terrifying. I was really surprised by the 1930s version, how just like anti-war it was, and the kind of movie it was. I think, if it released today, it would have had the same appeal as the 2022 version. Granted, people don't often like things that are in black and white, and sure, there weren't as many, special effects and explosions and things, but it was still incredibly entertaining for its 2-hour runtime. Um, I I don't really know what we really learned from these outside of war is bad, but we already knew that. Um,
Yeah, well, and I think that the 2022 version of All Quiet touches on, the because when they talk about the armistice and they talk about the negotiations, and while that wasn't in the book, I do think that it was good to put that in there because it
yeah,
puts in perspective the idea that not everyone was behind doing this and that there were people out there who were not okay with this anymore. They were not okay with losing this many people. And they knew that the Americans and, the other countries that they were going to get involved had just an unlimited supply of bodies that they could throw at this situation, and
yeah,
the Germans didn't. And that forced the Germans to negotiate in a way that left them at a serious disadvantage economically and emotionally for the next 15 years. And in doing so, it caused so much of what happened in World War II to happen.
yes,
The, economic destruction of Germany. So you have these kids who are totally fucked in the head going back home to people. And I mean, how do you go back after this? You can't. There's no going back. There's no being okay. And then you're living in a world where you're starving, where you maybe even if you don't have any visible wounds, you have arthritis or some kind of back injury or like whatever, and you can't
tinnitus,
economically, yeah, tinnitus, you can't support your family because you can't work 18 hours a day in a factory. And like, it's just fucked. What happened here is fucked. And we should like it should be a barometer of like, we can't let leaders do this to anyone ever again. And it's too bad that it just keeps happening.
yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
In the 1930s version, there's a scene where Paul returns home and he goes and he sees his father, and he's at like a bar or like a salon with some of his older friends. And that generation is just sitting around a table debating like the best strategy for the war and like keep going and getting to Paris. And I think after this war, you start to see that like because the civilians get involved in the constant bombings and shellings and having all of their property destroyed, being displaced to incredible degrees, and Dresden being bombed to hell and back and being completely rebuilt. You see that like the information, and especially after films like this, especially after stories like this, you see that the average person has such a better understanding of what's going on. And in a way, I think that has helped prevent some conflict. Obviously not all of it, but definitely some
Yeah.
parts of it.
Well, and
We
I
we
think that, yeah, go on.
yeah, we saw a lot of that with the coverage of the Vietnam War. That's how so many of
Mhm.
the counter protests got on. Is there were journalists there. There was every night there was on the news who was dying, how many people were gone. You obviously didn't have that kind of grand-reaching communication in World War One. That's hell. That's the plot of the first movie we talked about. So there, that's my takeaway: is we need more media like this, and we need more content like this, and even content like this from the last few wars we fought. And that was a great thing that came out of the Jeremy Renner movie, is really like just showing what was going on and why we
Yeah.
can't let it happen anymore.
And it's not of glorification, and I think that's important, is that it shows the terrible suffering, and it shows the what people sacrificed and what people lost. And even though Saving Private Ryan glorifies those people, at the same time it doesn't shy away from the horrors of storming the beach,
Yeah.
and people dying, and the sacrifices that had to be made in order to save Private Ryan. And I think that's something that war movies about current conflicts fail to do, and that's probably due to the propaganda machines that are funding them. um and it'll be interesting to see 20 years from now what movies come out about the current conflicts and how skewed that they will be in comparison. And I hope that, you know, I hope this ends, like I hope that, maybe it's too bad we can't go back to a Cold War situation where, we don't have a war.
Where
But
everybody's too afraid to fight
yeah,
because they know it'll be the end.
yeah. But we're in a situation where yet again we have more bodies that we can throw at the situation, and we don't even need bodies. We have robots now. We have drones. We have, heat sticking missiles and computers that can fight our wars for us. So there's no disincentive for the, greatest militaries in the world to fight these fights.
In the 1930s version, and I think this is probably where we'll end, one of the soldiers in there says, "Here's what I think we should do. We get all of their generals, all of their leaders, their cabinets, all the monarchs and their, families. We've all put them in a field. We all give them clubs, and whichever one comes out, they win." Even back then, there was the sentiment that they shouldn't be fighting with their lives. Me and the Kaiser aren't friends, but rather it should be these people. Uh, just a really great thing to end on. It's
Yeah,
uh, it's never us who the conflict is between. It's something bigger than ourselves.
yeah. Okie dokes. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. We will continue our war on Christmas as the Christmas months continue, and we'll be bringing you something from a different war. We're not quite sure what we're going to pick next, but it'll be something different. We've covered Iraq, World War II, medieval warfare, and now World War One. So we'll see what we bring you next.
Yeah, and stay tuned for the very likely actual Christmas holiday special that's going to come from left field if you don't have history with us.
Yeah,
Um,
I hope you enjoy it.
yeah, thank you for tuning into another War on Christmas episode. This has been the Binkhorsts and Blockbusters podcast, and have a good rest of your holiday season.
Have a good night, everybody.